So continuing with civilization or chaos. Uh, I'll just read the last paragraph we got to. If, on the contrary, we restrict, quote unquote, nothing in the special sense of pragabhava to, quote unquote, previous nothing or pure possibility, then creation becomes not only a reality amenable to theological treatment, but a reality in metaphysics, appropriate and necessary as the only course of self-manifestation, sva prakasattvam, the only course of self-manifestation open in the beginning to the infinite. Without the infinite, Dr. Mascarenhas continues, there can be no existing matter, not even existing from all eternity, for the infinite excludes only, quote unquote, absolute nothing. And therefore, all existing matter depends in principle on the infinite and has to be created out of previous nothing. The infinite alone is sufficient unto itself by metaphysical necessity. And since it excludes only absolute nothing, it is the primary and ultimate principle of all reality, manifest and non-manifest, actual and possible, whether existing in fact or merely capable of existing. That is purely principial. The infinite alone is recognized by supreme identity of cognition to be the absolute reality, necessary and transcendent, in regard to which the entire universe of manifestation, if considered independently, is rigorously null. Taken independently, the universe of manifestation, because of its intrinsic limitation, and this very entitative dependence, can never stand comparison metaphysically with the infinitude of the supreme principle, which holds all actual and possible manifestations principially. All creation entirely serves its purpose in the quality of support, pratika, for contemplation, dhyana, mystical consideration, dharana, and mystical rapture of ecstasy, samadhi, by which one should rise to transcendent knowledge of the supreme reality of all realities, which itself transcends all limitations and conditions, and is principally and ultimately itself the ineffable fullness of the truth of all truths. It is uncompromisingly certain that the transcendent infinity of the supreme principle is the ultimate absolute reality to which everything else serves merely as a pointer. In a word, Advaita Vedanta is concerned with transcendence absolute. Understood in this manner, there is and can be no question in Hindu doctrine of confusing the manifest universe with the non-manifest supreme principle. There is no question of confusing even the particular with the universal, or of mistaking the limited universal for the supreme universal. How can there be any possibility in Orthodox Hindu doctrine of materially identifying the world and God, as is done by modern theosophists who pose as interpreters of Oriental wisdom in the West? What kind of ultimate unity is this, uniting the many particulars to the one infinite? Have we here again the old philosophical dilemma of the one and the many? The unity which the discriminating Hindu mind recognizes as necessary and internal is the unity of principle. I will proclaim that which should be known, for when it is known, immortality is enjoyed. The beginningless supreme Brahm is neither Sat nor Asat. Here we have a correct approach to the infinite. No Aristotelian need be troubled by the translation of Sat as being and of Asat as absolute nothing, because the principle of the excluded middle is not violated by the special sense in which we have defined these terms. Moreover, Aristotelian metaphysics do not contemplate the infinite, anantam, in the sense of that which excludes only absolute nothing, but in the sense of the merely indefinite aparimitam. Cf. St. Thomas Aquinas, Summa Theologies 1, Quarto 7, Art 1 and 2, Articles 1 and 2. Here we must end our excerpts from the quintessence of Hinduism. It is remarkable how clearly the ultimate reality concept has been explored by a Catholic father, and goes a long way to proving the essential unity in the metaphysical basis of all the faiths. To return to the age of man and of this earth, such vast cycles of time are incomprehensible to us. When we look at history, we see civilizations coming up and going down. All is construction, preservation, and destruction. Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. Nothing lasts. The recorded history of man is so brief. As Alfred de Musset puts it, la vie est brève, un peu d'amour, un peu de rêve, et puis bonjour. La vie est vaine, un peu d'espoir, un peu de haine, et puis bonsoir. I have a tiny bit of French. I think it reads, life is brief, a little love, a little sadness or sorrow, and then bye-bye. Life is vain, a little hope, a little, I don't know what Haine is, Haine. And then the last line, and then good night. Since all external values and life itself are so fleeting, we can only surmise that our cultural heritage memory is recorded in our past lives. And that through the process of reincarnation, we benefit by acquiring instinctively past heritages of cultural experiences. For our progress comes, as always, through the process of gradual self-realization. Modern science is fast reaching a decisive stage in its growth, which entitles us to know some of the real spiritual truths concerning the nature of man and creation. Therefore, Meher Baba has written a book to be published when he deems opportune. And that starred, let's see, what is that talking about? God speaks? Don't know. We understand after his death. Oh, so that might be the secret book then, huh? In which he has explained many secrets which so far have remained hidden, although such secrets are within the grasp of the intellect and yet have completely baffled scientists. In this book, he has given the whole explanation of the evolution of the first man, who has been manifesting time and again, for he has been many millions of times evolved, not only on our earth, but on many millions of earths. The God-man, ageless, timeless, without beginning or end, God himself. In the same book, the master has also explained cycles, the position of the earth for realization, the earth dying, and the simultaneous evolution of another earth, not another planet, but ours, and many details from the spiritual, metaphysical, and scientific standpoints. This should be the greatest book of the age, since it is written by one who, in all fullness and completeness, knows as well as feels himself to be the one and the many at one and the same time, from beginningless beginning to the endless end. The one about whom the master Maulana Niaz Ahmed can sing. Yar Mara Zaman, Namo Nishane Digarast, Kul Yavmin Suratash, Der Shaklo Digarast. The translation, every time my beloved bears a different name, and manifests in a different garb. Yet ever the same face assumes a different form of beauty and grandeur. Here we might mention that amongst the Muslim perfect masters, the famous Bayezid of Bistam had repeatedly asserted himself to be God incarnate by using the expression, I am God. But at the same time, he did not encroach on the avataric status, since he always declared that he bowed down or worshipped the Rasul or avatar in the same manner as John the Baptist glorified Jesus. One might read many philosophical accounts and yet remain ignorant, as illumination is necessary to enable the aspirant to realize that creation is like an immense motion panorama, and that he is in it and not in it, inside and yet outside it all. As Paramahansa Yogananda explains, a God-man alone knows the truth behind the relativities of life and death. Omar Khayyam, so grossly misunderstood, sang of this liberated man in his immortal scripture, the Rubaiyat. Oh, the previous sentence, as Paramahansa Yogananda explains, has an asterisk. So let's see what it says. Oh, that's from Autobiography of the Yogi, just identifying the text. So Omar Khayyam, so grossly misunderstood, sang of this liberated man in his immortal scripture, the Rubaiyat. Ah, moon of my delight, who knowest no wane, the moon of heaven rising once again. How oft hereafter rising shall she look through this same garden after me in vain? The moon of delight, who knowest no wane, is God, eternal Polaris, anachronous never. The moon of heaven rising once again is the outward cosmos, fettered to the law of periodic recurrence. Its chains have been dissolved forever by the Persian seer through his self-realization. How oft hereafter rising shall she look after me in vain? What frustration of search by a frantic universe for an absolute omission. Christ expressed his freedom in another way, and a certain in another way. Quote, and a certain scribe came and said unto him, Master, I will follow thee whithersoever thou goest. And Jesus said unto him, the foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. Quote, spacious with omnipresence, could the Christ indeed be followed, except in the overarching spirit? Ah, good place for Marion to start reading. Could you unmute, please?
Chapter 7, Knowledge and Imagination, an explanatory communication from Meher Baba. On the one hand, Jinyan or Marifat, divine knowledge, is a thing which cannot be had even after going through numberless forms for countless ages. And on the other hand, when it comes, it comes. It would not be correct to say that knowledge comes quickly. To say that it comes suddenly or that it comes unawares and so on is still not correct to express the, quote, flash of becoming, which is beyond description because knowledge is beyond the range of imagination. Imagination has a imagination has a tremendous range and an almost unlimited scope, and man has a very strong imagination. For example, it would not be impossible for a man to imagine a rat having 1,000,000 heads. The whole world is created and carried on by the force of the imagination. But in spite of being apparently unlimited, imagination reaches the limit when checked by knowledge itself. By the power of imagination, no man can ever understand or explain the beginningless beginning or the endless end. In other words, eternity is beyond the reach of all imagination. And knowledge is knowledge of eternity. God is without beginning and without end. And there can never be any question of time and space in infinity, as otherwise, that would mean a limitation against God's infinitude. No amount of imagination can, therefore, ever think of infinity, because where there is no beginning, the very question as to what was in the beginning cannot arise at all. For example, let us repeat that before God, there was God, and before that, there was God, and before that, there was God, or repeat that after God is God, and after that, God is, and after that, God is. And all this would convey nothing to the imagination. That is why knowledge is said to be even beyond the reach of rishis and munis, who are the advanced saints. Hafiz also advises against the futility of trying to catch the falcon of knowledge when he says that nothing but emptiness can ever come into the net of imagination. Thus, the most powerful mind in imagination is entirely helpless against knowledge because it comes only after all power of imagination is completely and absolutely exhausted and ended. For imagination to go, mind must go. And for knowledge to come, consciousness must remain. Only when the mind disappears does consciousness get freed of all imaginary this and that, and I and you. The moment consciousness is freed from all imagination, this consciousness of nothing is all at once transformed into the knowledge of everything. That is, Jinyan Marifat. Even Vedanta and Sufism cannot reach or explain knowledge. One may try to imagine a shoreless ocean with numberless drops and think out in various terms of comparison and contrast. But just as no beginning, no end would always remain no beginning, no end, so knowledge can never be imagined. If that be so, and if I were a listener among you, I would have asked, quote, then why all this headache over explaining a thing which can neither be explained nor can it be grasped? End quote. Ordinary Swayambhu knowledge, or the ordinary self-knowledge, does not depend upon any process of reasoning or imagination. A man, woman, or child neither acquires nor has any need to acquire knowledge of one's individual existence from sources outside existence itself. A woman knows that she is a woman. This knowledge is not received. It is self-knowledge of womanhood. And the same is the case with the self-knowledge of manhood and childhood for a man and a child. Similarly, divine Swayambhu knowledge is divine knowledge of power, beauty, and bliss. When one gets such jnana or irfan, one not only feels oneself in everyone and in everything, but one then actually lives the free life of God. This knowledge can come even at a moment when one is attending to a call of nature, or has actually happened in certain cases, including that of Upasani Maharaj. That is because a master can give knowledge any moment instantaneously, provided there is a sufficiently deep and strong connection with him, or there is complete surrender to his will. The only other way is complete annihilation of imagination, like the attempt to prove that nothing is really nothing, which amounts to the annihilation of the mind by itself, and as such, it is next to impossible. Granting that as a very, very rare case, a man succeeds in breaking through his imagination by himself and achieves union with the truth, still such a one cannot make any use of the knowledge, and so he cannot become a jnani or arif. That is why masters like Tukaram and Jnaneshwar, Hafiz, and Rumi all say that there is no way out of imagination or ignorance, except with the help and by the grace of a perfect master. The fact is that God alone is real, and everything is in God. We all are one with him. But owing to our ignorance, we feel ourselves separate from God. We always were. What was before us? We. Before we. We. Only when we get knowledge, we know what this being means. Then instantly, everything is absolutely clear in the twinkling of an eye. But such a flash of being is even quicker than the twinkling of an eye. There is, therefore, no question of becoming God, since we are already God. And so, on the other hand, we have to cease to be God. In order to do that, we have got to get more and more away from God through prayers, fasting, etc. As otherwise, what can God do for God? That is why knowledge cannot come to one and all individuals, because we all are God, and God, being in everyone, who is to give and to whom? Only when God is perfectly individualized as most perfect jnani or most perfect arif can he impart knowledge to other individuals. The question may yet be asked as to why should the master then not impart knowledge to all individuals instead of giving knowledge to some and not giving it to others? This is a question of divine law, commonly known as the law of karma, or law of bindings, or law of cause and effect. Except the perfect jnani or perfect arif, no other individual can under any circumstances escape this law and its consequences. Therefore, when the master gives knowledge to certain individuals and does not give it to all, that is not because of the master's incapacity to give to all, but because of the incapacity of one and all to receive knowledge. The latter incapacity is due to the lack of a sufficiently deep and strong connection with the master, or for want of complete surrender to his will, or on account of the absence of the required degree of preparedness on the part of the individuals concerned. Under these circumstances, it would be like throwing pearls before swine for the master to offer knowledge to one and all, irrespective of the individual's receptivity. The fact is that scores of masters have come without beginning, and scores of masters will come without end. And still, it would be quite true to say that there is no question of any time at all, in spite of the countless epochs involved. If knowledge cannot come within the purview of one's imagination, how can one be able to imagine the one possessing knowledge? On one side, knowledge is so very, very small that it may be likened to a mustard seed. And on the other, it contains and covers everything in existence, including the nothing or ignorance of Maya. This dinyan, which in Sufism is termed marifat, lies in the certainty of becoming. There are three stages of this certainty. First is the certainty by intellectual conviction called ilmul yaqin. Second is the certainty of anakol yaqin through actual, quote, seeing. And the third, the certainty of certainties, is by becoming, or hukal yaqin. What the Vedantas say about our being one with God, even though that is not the intellectual conviction of ilmul yaqin, because when we hear that we are one with God, we imagine only what the intellect grasps temporarily. This temporary understanding turns into the certainty of intellectual conviction only when nothing whatsoever can check the conviction, and nothing can upset the holder of that conviction. And when one actually begins to see that one has grasped permanently. Then the yakin, or certainty of conviction, can be said to be spiritually firm for all times. It is only after one becomes united with one is that the certainty of conviction is dinyan or hakul yakin.
Thank you, Marianne. Mayor, would you like to read? Unmute and continue.
Yeah, thank you. Now, you all are ordinary men. This knowledge of manhood on your part does not depend upon intellect or reasoning whatsoever. You just know that you are men. None of you ever think, I am a woman, I am a stone, etc. That is because your knowledge that you are men is self knowledge of your manhood. And it is not the outcome of a mere belief based on what you hear about the feelings and experience of others. Similarly, when you actually feel and find that you have become God, you are then God. And this becoming is a knowledge which the master can and does impart at the right moment in literally no time at all. True Mahatmas and Valis can and may give the shadow of true knowledge to anyone by influencing through a touch, sound, or sight the centers and seeds of knowledge. But even that shadow may be enough to make one lose one's physical body. We all are, in a way, hypocrites, inasmuch as we always try to justify ourselves, right or wrong. According to the Vedantists and the Sufis, God does everything. Everything is done according to His will and in accordance with His laws. In a way, that is all right, but being short of one truth, the whole of it is not right. And the lack of truth is a lack of experience behind the assertions. The reactions of the actions based on such ignorance of knowledge are too terrible to contemplate, apart from other consequences like lunacy or nervous breakdowns. Bhakti Marg, which is the sum and substance of every religion, makes us inflexible over right is right and wrong is wrong, leading to a dry as dust, brittle and boring attitude of the mind. Under yoga practices, the experiencing of different kinds of temporary samadhis brings forgetfulness of reality and causes the yogi to lose sight of the goal itself. By jap tap and chilla kashi, he is entrapped in novel but nonetheless limited powers that eventually prove a boomerang for his mind. The real headache lies in the fact that we have to become really what we really are. And therefore, in order to gain God, we must first lose Him. Suppose I am God, then first I have to lose myself in order to be able to find myself. Complete loss of self means wants are not there, desires are not there, likes or dislikes are not there. You are not there. God is not there. In short, nothing is there. And this is real fana or the divine vacuum. The moment this fana takes place, at that very moment, God comes and into His own full glory of the everlasting Baka. This is not according to the Western concept of realization of this inside or that outside, but is discovery of God by God for God. Even when God is lost and found, the life of God is not there. The life of God can be led by regaining ordinary human sobriety and at the same time retaining one's divinity individualized. For example, Sai Baba's individuality is eternal, although his work in the different planes and spheres of existence is no longer there. Only those who were then in the respective planes of consciousness knew about Sai Baba's work in those particular planes. And all the work of Sai Baba in all the planes at one and the same time was known only to him and his contemporaries. Chapter 8, The Stages of the Path. In these days of analytical psychology, some knowledge of the dynamics of the path towards self realization would doubtlessly be appreciated. But it is a very difficult and abstruse subject, and those interested are sometimes inclined to think they knew more than they do. Tolstoy once remarked, one might succeed in explaining to the dullest of men the most difficult of problems if he had no previous conception in regard to it, but it is impossible to explain to the cleverest man even the simplest matter if he is perfectly sure that he knows everything about it. Christian lore was derived from the Egyptian schools of thought, which had their source in India. If we study the papyri in the British Museum or in Egypt, we can discern that the Egyptian hieroglyphs were often symbolical representation of the journey of the soul through creation, the different stages of the path being clearly depicted. If one should point out such signs to an Egyptologist, he would probably smile, remarking that the scripts do not tell him that. Lack of knowledge of the secret technique would make it difficult for him to appreciate the symbols. Yet, it is hardly reasonable to suppose that the high priests would divulge their secret knowledge to Hoi Polio, for whom alone the scripts were intended. A real spiritual experience begins when the aspirant is on the threshold of the path. This awakening is to be identified with the consciousness of the soul. For when its long journey through creation is coming to an end and it has reached the turning corner for the straight path back to whence it came, the soul begins to have faint recollections of its inherent divinity. The aspirant then experiences for the first time what some call touches of cosmic consciousness. There are three distinct initiations into the life of the spirit, which every writer on mysticism should know, as these subjective experiences herald the entrance to the path. They take the form of hearing, smelling, and seeing. At the same time, it is important to recognize the fact that those who have fleeting experiences in the form of glimpses should realize that these are very different and as nothing compared with actual stabilization on the plains. Such experiences should not be taken too seriously. Therein lies the great danger of self deception. The hearing of a peculiar buzzing sound in the ears, called by some the purring of the cosmic motor, often precedes subject to mystical sensations, which can develop into sound harmonies such as the music of the spheres, or again, the centaur's hoofs, the revolt of animal soul. The form, beauty, and harmony of such celestial music is beyond description. According to Meher Baba, the cosmic harmonies are peculiar to the first plane. In the experience of smelling, there may be an inexplicable sweet scent of flowers, seeming to come from nowhere. This experience belongs to the second and third planes. The most important of the initiations is seeing. Here, the white light will appear. It may become apparent in the beginning as a blinding flash, rendering the brilliant white light so dazzling that the aspirant realizes he's not perceiving with his physical eyes but with the inner eye.
Mayor, could you go again from this sentence? You missed a line.
Okay. This experience belongs to second and third planes. The most important of the initiations is seeing. Here, the white light will appear. It may become apparent in the beginning as a blinding flash, rendering the percipient temporarily unconscious, or it may be a shaft of brilliant white light, so dazzling that the aspirant realizes he is not perceiving with his physical eyes but with his inner eye. Seeing belongs to the fifth and sixth planes of consciousness, but this must not be confused with the real divine light in the sense of the Sufi term Noor. The master says the seventh plane is unique. For the sound, sight, and the smell, there is divine in its essence and has no comparison with the experience of the lower planes. For on the seventh plane, the aspirant has become self realized and is in everything. Therefore, he is sound, scent, and sight simultaneously. In different religions and yoga practices, after contact has been established with the planes, mystical experiences are induced. As Meher Baba says, contact with the first plane, sound, engenders inspiration. The second and third planes, smell, beget intuition. And fifth and sixth sight give illumination. The Sufi term is marifat, gnosis. The seventh plane stands for revelation, and this, according to Sufi terminology, is hakikat, reality.
Thank you, Mayor. Rolf, do you want to read for a bit? Unmute first. I can't see if you're.
Yes, there we go. Oh, are we in the second paragraph or at the top? At the bottom. Now a word of warning. When the aspirant has reached the fourth plane, the bliss associated with the sensations of sound, smell, and light are subdued and repressed. As this particular plane connotes the darkest night of the soul, he who traverses that plane alone, without the guidance of a perfect master, is exposed to the terrible dangers which accompany the pilgrim's progress along this plane. With its snares, delusions, and temptations, to use the powers exercised thereon. I think I misread that, or I just lost the thread of it.
Go ahead and repeat it if you wish.
The darkest night of the soul, he who traverses that plane alone without the guidance of a perfect master is exposed to the terrible dangers which accompany the pilgrim's progress along this plane. With its snares, delusions, and temptations, to use the powers exercised thereon. Should the pilgrim give way and misuse the powers in question, he may fall right back to the beginning of his evolutionary career and have to start his journey all over again. When it was said that Zoroaster was tempted by Ahriman, Buddha by Mara, and Jesus by Satan, this is a reference to their experiences on the fourth plane, which they and all other aspirants have to undergo before reaching their final destination, the seventh plane of Christ consciousness, where they become God realized or perfect. That is why it is always inadvisable to take up mystical practices without realizing what the consequences may be. There are powers which belong to all the three first planes, culminating in the fourth plane. And the more experienced a person becomes in handling of magical powers, the greater is the temptation to misuse them by seeking to dominate and influence others. The amorality of such practices should be widely known, for not only are others victimized in this way, but the persons who have reached a certain degree of proficiency in the manipulation of dangerous forces they do not understand will eventually victimize themselves as already described by having a fall in evolution. It is really a case of the blind leading the blind into a bottomless pit. Though some persons may be sincere in their quest, they are still playing with an incalculable force, nonetheless dangerous. To return to the main theme, awe-inspiring revelations of a cosmic nature may develop as cogent evidence to the aspirant that there is something outside the phenomenal world of forms. Krishnamurti has, I've never seen that name spelled that way, KRISH-NAMURTI, has an expression, the something that cannot be formulated. The saints have testified as to the impossibility of putting such spiritual experiences into words. But at the same time, such mystical adventures bear unmistakable credentials of their validity. But many seekers may have hallucinations and delusions which bear no relation to the experiences described above. As Meher Baba explains, the only way to recognize the validity of such spiritual initiations is the joy, peace, and ecstasy which should follow. There are two states of consciousness in man, the finite and the infinite. The infinite state is only achieved when man has completed his journey through the seven planes or spheres of consciousness. The final or seventh plane of consciousness can only be accomplished through the help of a perfect master. It must always be borne in mind that the first six planes of the path are an illusory pilgrimage within Maya or creation. Only when the seventh plane has been reached does the aspirant have a real awakening unto truth consciousness, and only a perfect master can awaken the seeker from his dream state of Maya and initiate him into the realm of actual reality, which, as we know, is the only real self-realization or godhood. When a master needs his disciple for daily activities, he will draw him along across the path unconsciously, as if under a veil, through the different stages of the various planes of spiritual experience. It is useless to try to explain what is inexplicable, since no intellectual explanation of the mystery of life, death, and Maya is possible. Only when a man has become fully awakened will he know the lahar within, the absolute, and the capital B, all caps, BHAS, and the Bas of manifestation.
Thank you, Rolf. It's a good place to stop and start next week. Let's see. So stop the share and stop the recording.